The sky bled amber as the last light of day sank beneath the plains. Dust rode the wind like ghosts unsettled, coiling through brittle weeds and whispering through the bones of a place that had forgotten warmth. She stood in the doorway of her cabin, arms crossed over a threadbare shawl, eyes watching nothing and everything at once. In her silence was the weight of many winters and more memories than she cared to carry. Her home was a thing of stubbornness, half stone, half wood, all scars. The roof had once been charred through by lightning, the walls patched with salvaged planks and bent nails. The land around it lay split with dryness, yet life still clung in the form of a few goats and a mule too mean to die. No neighbors.
No town.
Just the long open and the ghosts she'd let inside. She didn't keep a name anymore. Names were easier to steal than lives. A buzzard circled overhead. Not high, not circling wide, close. She knew what that meant. Something dying, and not long from now. She looked west, where the wind was thick with something that smelled like blood and iron. Then she saw the dust trail, ragged, crooked, like a drunk man walking blind. She reached for her shotgun slowly, not from fear, but from memory. The figure came into view a few minutes later. A man, slumped in his saddle, reins loose in his hand. Horse lathered and limping. She didn't move. She'd seen men like this before. The kind running from hell with a piece of it still lodged inside. The horse stopped just shy of her well, snorted once, then collapsed without a sound. The man tumbled with it, hit the ground hard, and didn't rise. She approached only when the wind told her it was time. He was white. Mid-40s maybe. Blood caked around a wound in his side. Looked like a bullet, though the bleeding had slowed. His coat was torn and singed at the collar. His face was a map of pain and days without sleep. She crouched beside him, pressed fingers to his throat. Still alive.
Barely.
"Why'd you come this far?" she muttered, more to herself than him. His lips moved, dry and cracked. "Grant," he whispered. "Bastard, took it all." She almost left him there. Almost. It would have been easy. Drag the body into the brush, let the coyotes do their part. A mercy, even. But something in the way his hand still clutched his side, not for defense, but for shame, unsettled her. That and the look on his face. Not fear. Not desperation. Regret. That one she knew. She dragged him inside. He was heavier than he looked, but her arms had known labor for years. The fire was already low in the hearth. She threw on dry wood, let it crackle to life. Laid him out on the rug that used to be a coat. The cabin creaked like it disapproved. She peeled off his coat, inspected the wound. Clean entry, no exit. Bullet still in. She hissed between her teeth, not from pity, but from the work ahead. The knife she used had once been her father's, a bone-handled thing with an edge still sharp after all these years. She sterilized it in the fire, poured whiskey into a tin, and began. He groaned once when she dug in, but didn't wake. When the bullet came free, it clinked into the tin like a coin dropped into an empty church box. She sewed him up with thread boiled in rainwater, hands steady even as her own memories shook loose. When it was done, she sat back, wiped sweat from her brow, and drank the rest of the whiskey herself. Night came full and cold. Outside, the prairie held its breath. Inside, she listened to the man's rattling sleep, the fire's slow breath, the occasional creak of a world trying not to fall apart. He woke once, in the deep hours before dawn, blinked at her like a man seeing the last thing he expected. A black woman, in a cabin, with firelight dancing across a worn face and sharper eyes. "You a doctor?" he asked, voice like gravel.
"No," she said.
"Why'd you?" "I didn't," she replied. "Not yet." He looked at her like he didn't understand. Maybe he didn't. Then his eyes closed again, and sleep took him. She stayed up, watching shadows flicker across the walls. Her hands trembled only once, when she reached for her shawl and touched blood instead. Outside, the wind carried something new, not just cold. A smell she recognized from long ago. Gunpowder, horses, and rain. Someone had been close. watching maybe. Or maybe the land was just stirring again. Before sleep, she checked the hidden hollow beneath the floorboards. The revolver was still there, dry and loaded. She touched it once, then closed the trap with care. By morning, the storm had moved in, gray clouds like low mountains, thunder rumbling faintly in the east. The man was still alive, breathing deep and uneven, like someone running from wolves in his dreams. She stood on the porch, coffee in hand, shotgun nearby. Her eyes scanned the horizon, then flicked to the trail where he'd come from. No riders yet, but something told her they weren't far. A whisper in the wind said trouble wasn't finished. Not by a long shot. And this time, she wouldn't run. Rain arrived with the dawn, soft and cold, tapping the tin roof in a rhythm that felt like memory. The woman moved through the cabin in practiced silence, lighting the fire again, laying out strips of dried venison, checking her snare lines through the window. Nothing about her face showed weariness, though she hadn't slept. A life spent in the margins had taught her that rest was a gamble, best not to bet when you've seen how often the house wins. The man stirred beneath a coarse wool blanket. His breathing was stronger, though ragged, his skin flushed with returning life. She watched him from the table, not unkind, but wary, the way a hunter watches a wounded animal, calculating the line between pity and danger. He opened his eyes slowly, lids cracking like old leather. For a moment, he looked around as if uncertain where he'd landed. When he saw her, sitting with arms crossed, a steaming tin mug beside her, he didn't speak, just blinked. "You're alive," she said simply. "Feels like I got dragged through hell." She shrugged. "Hell's quieter." He tried to sit but groaned sharply and fell back, hand going to his side. "Bullet."
Gone.
"You bled enough to fill a grave." She took a sip from a mug. "Didn't think you'd last the night. Didn't think I would either." He shifted, wincing. "You got a name?" She didn't answer. The silence stretched, brittle and humming. He huffed, half laughing. "Didn't figure you'd share." "Most don't. Names don't save lives," she said. "Pain does. Makes you remember what not to do again." His face twisted, not at her words, but at the truth in them. "Well, I remember plenty." She stood and crossed to him, crouched to examine the stitches. Her hands moved with the ease of someone who's patched up too many wounds, too many men who didn't deserve a second chance. The rancher, though he hadn't said so, she could tell by the calluses on his palms and the weather in his skin, watched her like someone studying the edge of a blade. "Where were you headed?" she asked, still working. He hesitated.
North.
"Maybe west." Didn't much matter anymore. "That's not the answer," she said. "No," he admitted. "It's not." She nodded once. "Then say it true."
His jaw tightened.
"There's a man named Grant. Syndicate boss. Took my brother's ranch out by Deer Hollow. Branded it under his cattle claim with forged paper and a crooked judge. That all. He set fire to the house while my brother was inside. Called it a legal dispute." His voice hardened. "I shot one of his men, maybe two. Been running since." She sat back on her heels, studying him. There was steel under his exhaustion, the kind forged in grief and sharpened by revenge. But also something else. Guilt, maybe. "And what do you want now?" she asked. He looked toward the hearth, where the fire had begun to settle into coals. "What any man wants, I suppose.
Rest.
And maybe one chance to set things right." She stood and went to the shelf, returned with a strip of bread and a sliver of cheese. He took it without thanks, ate like a man unfamiliar with kindness. Crumbs fell onto his chest. The silence between them felt less like distance, now, and more like fragile understanding. "You got folks?" he asked quietly.
No.
"Always?" "Long enough." He nodded slowly. "Sometimes I think the land takes more than it gives."
It always does, she said.
The trick is figuring out why it lets you live at all. Rain thickened against the windows. In the hush, her mind drifted, not to him, but to the war, to her mother's hands holding herbs slick with blood, to the way fire had looked licking up the sides of the church where she'd once slept. She hadn't saved anyone back then. Not really. Just endured. Survival wasn't victory. It was penance. He broke the quiet. You could have left me. I still might. A tired grin crossed his lips. Fair. He shifted again, hand brushing against his coat on the floor beside the bed. Something crinkled. She watched as he pulled out a folded piece of paper, stained dark where the bullet's blood had touched it. He offered it to her without explanation. She unfolded it.
A deed.
Handwritten. Signed by a judge. Marked by a cattle brand she recognized. The same one used by the men who'd raised a freedmen's camp 2 summers back, then vanished into the lawless brush with no consequences. Grant, she said quietly. He nodded. You know him? I've seen what he leaves behind. The fire popped. Outside, thunder rumbled, low and distant. She folded the paper again, more gently than she expected, and placed it on the table. Then she stood, crossed to the door, opened it. The wind slapped her shawl against her frame, rain dampening her boots. She peered out across the prairie. No riders yet, but the world felt like it was holding its breath. I don't have space for a war, she said without turning around. But I'll give you tonight. After that, we'll see.
He didn't respond.
She didn't wait for one. That night, after he'd fallen back into uneasy sleep, she stood over him for a long time. The fire cast shadows on his face that made him look younger, or maybe just more broken. She thought about the risk, the danger of harboring a man wanted by syndicate law, the blood he might bring to her door. But more than that, she thought about the way he'd said rest, like it was something sacred. She didn't trust him. Not yet. Maybe never. But something had brought him here. And not everything the land gives is a curse. In the dark, as wind slipped through the eaves like a whisper, she moved her chair to the door and set the shotgun across her lap.
She didn't sleep.
The rain had stopped, but the earth had begun to speak again.
Hoofbeats. Faint. Far.
Trouble was coming. But now, she wasn't sure she'd send it away. By the time morning cracked across the horizon in a line of soft gold and bruised blue, the wind had changed again. It came in low and mean from the east, carrying the scent of horses and leather oil, and something fouler beneath. Fear, maybe, or violence, wearing its usual disguise. She rose from her chair, bone stiff from holding still too long, and watched the trail.
Dust.
4 riders. No rush in their pace, which told her what kind of men they were. The confident kind. The kind who believed the land already belonged to them. Inside, the rancher stirred. He sat up slower than pride would like, wincing as the pain found its voice again.
They're here, she said.
He didn't ask who.
Didn't need to.
His face hardened, mouth set into a line worn down by loss. He pulled the blanket aside and reached for his coat. She didn't stop him. If he was going to die, it wouldn't be shivering under wool. How many? He asked.
4.
Could be more behind. He nodded. They'll want to talk first. Grant's men always like to sound polite before they spill blood.
Her voice was calm.
Then we should listen carefully. He checked the revolver she'd given him, his own, cleaned and reloaded. His hands were unsteady, but they moved like they remembered what killing felt like. She handed him a knife, its edge still bearing the soot from the fire. No ceremony, just necessity. When the riders came into view, they didn't bother hiding their faces. One wore a silver badge that wasn't state-issued, just a piece of metal carved to resemble power. Another had a rifle across his lap, polished wood dark with rain from the night before. All of them had the same look in their eyes. Cold, patient, entitled. They dismounted like men who assumed the house already belonged to them. One of them, tall and red-haired with a scar through his brow, tipped his hat as he stepped forward. "Mornin'," he drawled. The woman didn't answer. Neither did the rancher. The red-haired man smiled wider. "Don't suppose either of you'd mind handin' over what ain't yours." Silence. Then the woman spoke. "This land's mine. Everything on it." The man laughed, motioned lazily to the house, the animals, the trees barely surviving in the wind. "This ain't even on the map. That's the point." The smile fell. "We ain't here to argue borders. We're looking for a man named Mercer. Tall, dirty blonde, bullet hole in his side. Carries a grudge. The rancher took a step forward. That's me. All four guns twitched. You got brass, I'll give you that, the red-haired man said. But brass don't stop bullets. Mr. Grant sent word you'd turn up before long. Said you got it in your head to cause trouble. I'm here to settle a debt. Is that what we're calling murder now? The rancher's voice was flat. He killed my brother. The man's smile thinned into something meaner. Law don't care what he did. All that matters is what we say you did. You come with us. We let the woman be. Her voice cut in sharp. That's not your decision. He looked at her then, truly looked. You're harboring a wanted man. Could call that aiding a fugitive. Could call that obstruction. You could, she said. But then you'd have to cross my line. The rifleman shifted in his saddle. One of the others spat into the dirt. The rancher stepped closer to her, voice low. They'll shoot. So will I. He gave her a glance, half gratitude, half warning, but didn't pull her back. Maybe he knew better. Red Brow nodded once. All right then. Guess this ends the hard way. His hand dropped. For things happen fast. Her shotgun barked first, fire ripping the silence in two. The rifleman tumbled off his mount with half his shoulder gone. The rancher's revolver fired next, 2 shots, clean and practiced. One missed, one didn't. The third man crumpled by the well, gurgling through his teeth. The red-haired man ran, not away, but sideways, toward cover. But she was already moving, loading another shell, not blinking through the smoke. The fourth rider, the youngest, panicked and bolted, spurring his horse into the wild without firing a shot. Silence came back slowly, interrupted only by the crackle of the wind and the whimper of the dying. She approached the red-haired man last. He was on the ground, leg twisted under him, blood blooming through his vest. He looked up at her, eyes wide with disbelief. You ain't law, he rasped. No, she said. But I know what justice looks like.
She aimed.
He didn't beg. That almost earned him something. Almost. When it was over, the land went quiet again. She and the rancher stood amid the wreckage, breathing hard, hearts pounding like war drums.
Neither spoke for a while.
The bodies lay heavy in the dirt, feeding the thirsty soil. Finally, he said, They'll send more. I know. You don't have to stay in this. I've been in it longer than you. He looked at her then, not as a stranger, but as someone made of the same cut iron and burned edges. I didn't come here to bring death, he said quietly. But it always finds me. Her eyes softened, just a breath. Then maybe it's time you stop running. He looked back at the trail. Dust was gone now. Rain had washed it clean. Behind them, the cabin still stood. Scarred, smoke curling from the chimney, but solid. She turned and walked back toward it. After a moment, he followed. Inside, the fire still burned. The days that followed were made of quiet repairs and louder questions. The woman patched the buckshot holes in the door and scrubbed blood from the floorboards. The rancher stacked the dead men's weapons in a burlap sack by the hearth, not yet ready to bury them. Not because he was afraid, they were already ghosts, but because he knew once he put them in the ground, the clock would start. More would come. He could feel the storm building behind the horizon. They didn't speak much, but they moved like they'd done this before, somewhere in different lives, her mending a torn world, him bracing for its return. One night, he found her on the porch, fingers brushing over the edges of an old photo. It had been taken before the war, he guessed, before her face had grown so still. A woman stood in the picture's center, younger and softer, but with the same flint in her eyes. A child clung to her hip. The photo was faded, worn like something too often touched and too rarely shown. Your family? He asked, voice low. She didn't answer. Just slipped it back into her coat, slow and careful. I had a wife, he said after a beat. Once. She looked at him then, not curious, just open. She left when my brother died. Said the land was cursed. Maybe it was. Maybe I was. She wrong. Some days, I'm not sure. She nodded. then were the same. A gust stirred the trees, dry leaves rasping like old bones. Far out on the prairie, a coyote howled once, sharp and lonely. Later, in the hush between midnight and morning, a horse's cry woke them both. Not panic, warning. She was up first, rifle in hand. He followed, slower but ready. They stepped out into the chill, moonlight slicing across the yard like a knife. Something was moving at the edge of the trees. Something slow, purposeful, not riders.
Not this time.
Just one man, stumbling forward with a lantern swinging at his side. His coat bore the same cattle brand as the men they'd buried. But he wasn't armed. When he reached the porch, they kept their guns raised. Easy, the stranger said, raising his free hand. I'm not here to kill nobody. Strange introduction, the rancher said. The man gave a tired, crooked smile. I'm not like Grant's others. Name's Enoch. I knew your brother, Mercer. Good man. Mercer stepped down a step, the wood creaking under his boot. You rode for Grant? I rode with him, Enoch said. Back when he wasn't trying to be king of every fence post from here to Salt Creek. The woman said nothing, but her grip on the rifle didn't ease. I ain't here for mercy, Enoch went on. I'm here for justice. Same as you. Mercer's eyes narrowed. You think that earns you trust? No, Enoch said, but it might earn me a chance. He reached into his coat, slow, deliberate, and pulled out a small journal bound in cracked leather. Tossed it to the rancher's feet. What's that? Mercer asked. Names, Enoch said.
Dates.
Every dirty deed Grant's paid for. Every lie he's fed to courts and cattlemen alike. I wrote it all down. Been carrying that book for 6 months, waitin' for someone to do something with it. The woman finally spoke. Why not use it yourself? He met her eyes. Because I'm a coward. But cowards can still leave the door open for braver folk. Mercer picked up the book and flipped it open. He didn't need to read far. There were names he knew. One of them was his brother's. What do you want from us? He asked. Just to see it done, Enoch said. That's all. Just see it finished. They let him stay the night in the shed, stripped of weapons but not chained. Trust was a slow thing, and it moved like molasses in frost. By morning, the decision was made. We go to Deer Hollow, the woman said. Bring the book to Judge Renner. Make it public. He's corrupt, Mercer warned. Used to be, Enoch said. But his daughter married into the Paxton clan last month. Changes a man's priorities. Mercer looked to the woman. She met his gaze without blinking. There was fire behind her still, but something steadier now. Not just survival. Direction. All right, he said. We ride at night. It took 2 days to reach Deer Hollow. They kept to narrow trails and shadowed valleys, traveling like whispers. Enoch rode behind, quiet but watchful. The woman led. She knew how to move through the land without disturbing its breath. When they arrived, it was near dawn. Pale mist hung over the town like gauze. The streets were still. They dismounted by the church, neutral ground, and made their way to the courthouse on foot. Renner was already there. A cautious man. A man who'd buried enough secrets to know when the earth was about to crack. The ledger hit his desk with a dull thud. What's this? He asked. Your choice, the woman said. Burn it and stay a puppet. Or use it and make yourself a legend. Renner turned a few pages.
His face changed. Paled. Hardened.
You understand what this means? He asked. Mercer nodded. We do. Renner closed the book. His fingers tapped once against the wood. Come back tomorrow, he said. It'll be done. They left without another word. That night, Grant's ranch went up in flames. No court order. No arrest. Just fire. Pure and biblical. Whether it was the townsfolk or men hired quiet-like by the judge, no one could say. But justice came, not as a gavel, but as smoke. At sunrise, Mercer stood at the edge of the prairie, the wind tugging at his coat. The woman stood beside him, her rifle slung across her back. Enoch was gone, vanished like a ghost who'd finished his haunting. You think it's over? He asked. She shook her head. Things like this never end. They just change shape. He looked at her, truly looked. You ever think of leaving all this? All the time. Then why stay? She glanced at the horizon, where the sun was crawling up behind the hills. Because some places are worth defending, and some people are worth starting over for. He let the words sit. Let them sink. Then he said, So what now? She gave a half smile.
Small.
Real. Now, she said, we build something better. And beside the ashes of one man's empire, they began.